Lesson number 35 in the Minor Prophets. It's getting to be a long ways. But we are studying in the Book of Hosea. And today we'll be looking at Hosea chapter 9. It's not a long chapter, a little bit long for Hosea, 17 verses, but a lot of material here, so I hope we can get through it today. I've got 10 through 15 up there at the beginning, but let's see, yeah, it goes through 17. Anyway, we might just go through and then come back and hit some of the stuff. Make sure that we get the high points of what's going on in this chapter. And we've looked at some of the things, and remember, Israel and Judah are unrepentant. And that was at that time. Now, Israel remains unrepentant. Judah eventually does repent at the time of Hezekiah. So they get to continue on for another 120 years. But at this time, the prophecy is mainly to the northern kingdom of Israel. Judah is going to be included in that somewhat. But there you have a continuation of the Lord's charge basically against Israel and Judah. But now we come to the Lord will punish Israel. And again, we've talked about it in these terms. There's just no doubt about it. The nation is going to be destroyed. So in the first 3 verses, the land of the Lord will not be left to ingrates, all right? And why do we say the land of the Lord? Because the heavens and the earth belong to the Lord, right? We have to remember the earth, to a large degree, is in rebellion to the Lord, even today, right? So in those days, and especially if you go back even right after the time of Noah, it doesn't take very long before those demonic forces establish themselves to the point where there are gods, small g, over different nations. Egypt has its gods. Mesopotamia has its gods. Palestine, Canaan, has its God. All these nations have their gods that they worship, and they worship it through the form of the idols. So Baal worship, the golden calves. They're worshiping Baal, but the idol is the golden calf. Follow me? The power through the golden calf is Baal, that God, that demonic force that is leading people into that worship. But one thing that we haven't touched, all right, Baal would be the main god, and just like in, was it Greece or Rome that Zeus was the main god?
Greece.
Wasn't it Greece?
Greece? Okay.
I think it was.
Then the Roman Empire had its main god. So you have, remember, the main god, small g, behind all of this is the prince of the power of the air, Satan. And all of these demigods or smaller gods are those demonic forces, and I believe the fallen angels that were in rebellion to the Lord God and were kicked out of heaven. Book of Revelation, right? There was war in heaven. right? A rebellion. Satan tried to take over, come to this earth. And I think where some people in translating or interpreting, making comments on the book of Revelation, maybe they should go and revisit that and put that back in. This is the original deal, all right? And then once you see this panoply of gods, know that in the book of Revelation you got two gigantic forces that are being destroyed by the Lord, right? Who's the first persecutor of the church? The Jews, right? And you have the destruction of Jerusalem. Who is the next persecutor of the church? The Roman Empire. And what happens to them? They're destroyed. But where does it all begin? Way back at the beginning, that original rebellion. So, the land will not be left to ingrates. Who are the ingrates? These are the people who worship through the idols, worship these demonic forces rather than the Lord. But why is Canaan, or that area that's given to Israel and Judah, why is that the Lord's land?
It's what he promised to his people. You can't give away that which isn't yours. You know, God is over the earth, but that specific area was destined for his people.
Yeah. So in what we might call a division of the land to a degree, yes, Egypt has its gods, Mesopotamia has its gods, other nations have their gods. Here, Canaan has its gods, but what does God do with Israel? Drives those nations out and establishes Yahweh worship there. And that's all it's supposed to be. But what do the people do?
Pull everything back in.
They continue to worship those gods, those demonic forces that are already in play there. And actually, the Lord gives it to them, but they celebrate these other demonic gods. So that's why they're called ingrates. You follow along? You can understand then why, and then when they get there, what are they supposed to be? A light to the Gentiles. Their worship of Yahweh is supposed to be so pure and so faithful that these other nations see them being blessed by the Lord, and they say, we want to be a part of that. Kind of like the church today. We are supposed to be such salt and light in the community, in the world, that what? People say, I want to be a part of that. Now it's hard, isn't it? It's hard because the world is in rebellion and Satan makes it look so good. And those demonic forces that are influencing, they make the world and sin look so good. But yet, that's our challenge today. And I'm sorry, grateful, Thanksgiving coming up, even though that's a national holiday, still, as the church, we need to be grateful to God, the Lord. Okay, now, man.
I hadn't thought about it till now, but as the people wandered to the promised land, wandered, W-A-N-D-E-R, Moses kept them in line.
To a degree.
To a degree, to the best of his ability. Let's just, once they got to the promised land, that powerful individual force, Aaron and they had the priests, but they didn't have someone that was in constant communication with God like they did through Moses. They were on their own, is what I'm trying to say. And what they do, as soon as you turned them loose, they went every direction religiously.
But there are two things, and I'll get to you in a moment, Lance. Two things. Number one, even in the wilderness, even before they got to the wilderness in that 40 years wandering, they were already creating a god,
Yes.
Baal. All right? And they get into the wilderness, and we've had passages before, they were worshiping Rephaim, and there was another god. But the point was, and the point still even comes today, and I think we just had it last week, I think. Why should I give them more laws? They're not going to follow more laws. So here's the point. He gave them a covenant. He gave them the law of Moses to follow. He didn't need to have a constant because there was fellowship there, there didn't need to be a constant presence, if you're following along, a constant presence. The law, and even Paul says this, I think it's in the book of Romans, if there was a law given that could make a man holy or such, it was the law of Moses, right? So they had the law, they knew what to do, but the law could not change their hearts. If they didn't want to keep the law, guess what? They weren't going to keep it. Just like today, if a person does not want to believe and obey the gospel, you can't make enough laws to make them do it. They're going to be in constant rebellion, pure and simple.
That's applicable to evil, period.
Yes. The rebellious nature that we grow up in a fallen world and we're taught to be rebellious. We rebel against authority, don't we? Well, who's the highest authority?
God himself.
Yeah. Okay, now, Lance.
You answered my questions with your comments.
Which one was that? The
About them, even though they were together, they still were worshiping other things. And I was going to say, that there would be strength in numbers to have somebody that's leading them, but it wouldn't make a difference. You answered my questions.
Yeah, that law. And look at the things that happened to them there and the people that were destroyed when they went wrong. It's like water off a duck's back.
Still got that going on today.
Mm-hmm.
So many things.
Okay. Verses 4 through 6, a complete separation from the covenant. Okay, and what we're going to find there is, all right, they had a covenant, and God was merciful. Look at all, we talked about the period of the judges and the cycles that run through there. And God would give them a deliverer, bring them back. How many times does that have to happen? They thought, he's going to do it again. We're the Lord's people. He'll do it again. No, there was going to be a complete separation. They didn't know the covenant. They weren't learning the covenant. They weren't interested in keeping the covenant. So what? They're going to go to exile, and they are going to, as slaves, they're going to have to worship the gods of the people that they are enslaved to. Now, there might be some that's under a patriarchal type worship Yahweh, but what happens if they get caught?
Probably death.
Yeah. So we're going to catch this later, hopefully, maybe. All right. Maybe we won't have time. Make the application today. And we've talked about it last week. What happens when a nation sends its wealth to another nation? Okay? And then, all right, you owe us. Okay? Here's this. All right, will you take a promissory note? Will you take an IOU? Okay. Israel owed Assyria to the point where, now, at first, all right, we're protected and we can do this stuff, we can be productive, but all of a sudden the tax burden and the reduction or the loss of revenue going to Assyria made them poorer to the point where, hey, we can't afford to pay you anymore. And we talked about how eventually that's going to come back to human capital. You're going to be slaves. Your children are going to be slaves. All right? Think about that in terms today. What has happened? Who is the United States indebted to?
China, mostly.
Yeah, who bought all of our treasury bonds and stuff and kept us afloat for that $31 trillion? What if they say, okay, we want to cash in our bonds? We don't have $31 trillion in the treasury. You know, it's all right. What do you want from us then? Well, you think about in some terms, where is a lot of the wealth in the United States of America today? Well, some of the churches. And all of a sudden, because even now they're talking about taxing churches, which, you know what?
Not a bad idea.
Not a bad idea, because some of them are not really churches. And I wouldn't mind, you know, the Bible tells us to pay our taxes, right? If we had to pay taxes, wouldn't hurt us any, would it? As a congregation, wouldn't hurt us at all. But think about the Catholic Church. Think about the Mormons who own so much. See? All right, you start taking that away. But when we become enslaved, but more so our children, our grandchildren become enslaved, you don't think that they will do what they're doing to religious people there in China now? You need to go to a re-education camp. Get this religious stuff out of your system. Who's the god of Assyria? Well, I'm not sure. It may not be Baal. It may be Molech or Marduk or somebody like that. But you're enslaved over there. Guess who you're going to worship? At least outwardly. Maybe your heart will be with Yahweh, but you better put Roman Empire, put a pinch of incense on the altar and say, Caesar is Lord. Modern day implications that were going on centuries ago. Okay? A complete separation from the covenant. You don't have it anymore. You can't go to the temple. Of course, in 120 years or so, the temple's going to be destroyed anyway. All right? You can't offer a sacrifice to Yahweh. You probably don't have cattle. You're a slave. You don't have anything. They had houses in Israel. Well, what do they got in captivity? And think about antebellum United States before the Civil War. Slavery there. All right. And some of the argument that was made about slavery, we're doing these people a favor. Look how they lived over in Africa. We're doing them a favor. And think back at how some of those people were made to live. Think that was a favor? Okay. So, but that's what Israel was headed to, because they weren't grateful to the Lord and weren't faithful. Verses 7 through 9, the days of punishment and recompense. Punishment and recompense. A prophet is a fool, the man of the spirit is mad. That's what they considered. People like Amos and Hosea, the prophets that were sent to them, you're crazy. You're telling us the Lord is going to let us be destroyed? What's the matter? The United States is going to be destroyed? Are you kidding me? Think it can't happen? Yeah. From within, for sure. But recompense. What does recompense mean? Recompense.
It's repayment, isn't it?
Repayment or something.
It's getting what you deserve.
Yeah.
It's a judgment, and you're getting what you deserve.
They're
Israel was
paying for what you have done.
paying for what you've done. No mercy. We've talked about that before, haven't we? God's mercy. God is very merciful, but there's an end to his mercy, because along with his mercy, there's also justice. But we've got a sermon coming up on that pretty shortly, okay? Yeah, he's merciful, but he's 100% mercy, he's 100% justice, and those two have to come together at some point. And here it is. All right, they're going to get what they deserve. The prophet, verse 8, the prophet is a watchman, the watchman of Ephraim with my God. Okay? Yet a fowler snares on all his ways, and hatred in the house of God. Last Sunday evening, what was it? Psalm 124? The snare is broken. Yeah. So that would apply back then when they come out of exile, but even more so today, because the snare that Satan has set for us and traps us in sin and death, that snare is broken because Jesus Christ came and died upon the cross, went to the Hadean realm, and now he has the keys of death and Hades. That snare's broken. We don't have to fear death. And we've got a remedy for sin. Hey, but boy, they didn't. Because God's mercy. Now, individually, they could turn to God. But as a nation, the nation was going to fall. And verses 10 to 11, I love this. All right. Like grapes in the wilderness, I found Israel. Like the first fruit on the fig tree in its first season. I saw your fathers, but they came to Baal Peor and consecrated themselves to the thing of shame and became detestable like the thing they loved. Ephraim's glory shall fly away like a bird. No birth, no pregnancy, no conception. So even though it says like grapes in the wilderness, I don't know if they really had apples back in that area. I think apples are more of a northern climate deal. All right, so there may be kind of a change in the language for, but the grapes in the wilderness, it's like grapes need to be cultured, don't they? You got to prune the grapevines to make them produce abundantly and to make the fruit good. You follow me? Well, that's how the Lord found Israel. They were like great, and he prunes them and he takes care of them. How? By bringing them out of bondage, giving them the law, giving them a religion to follow, blessing them. But they came to Baal Peor, and that's where they started worshiping that detestable thing and loved it. They loved it. So the apple of the Lord's eye. We talk about the apple of the eye, don't we? Something we really love. The Lord loved Israel, but it was because of what? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Especially Abraham, the father of the faithful. Right? He loved them. But they became detestable because of their idolatry. Make an example. Follow an example. A man sees a woman, he falls in love with her, she becomes the apple of his eye, he marries her, he treats her fantastically, wonderfully, lovingly. She commits adultery against him. What happens? She becomes detestable in his eyes. Follow? Because, is that what we have at the beginning of the book of Hosea? All right, 12 through 14. Well, back to verse 11. The second part, no birth, no pregnancy, no conception. What's that mean?
I noticed that it's backwards. Conception, pregnancy, and then birth. It's birth, conception.
To reproduce.
What's the purpose of human beings that God gave to man?
Populate the earth.
Be fruitful and multiply. Okay? So here's Israel, and it's kind of again like today. If all of your wealth is going to Assyria, and you can't afford to eat, you can't afford to have children. Except you get on down to the when Samaria was surrounded, and I'm searching for the word. That's awful. And Jerusalem later on the same way. When the enemy surrounded it, nobody could go in, nobody could go out for 3 years. Women had children just so they'd have something to eat. You can't afford to have children. What's the hope for your nation? There isn't. So, verse 12 through 14. Even if they bring up children, I will bereave them till none is left. Okay. Which is better? To never have children, or to have children to watch them suffer and die? You think about that. Which is better? Sometimes circumstances in life bring that up. if you know that there's going to be a war. What happens in war? People die, children die, young men go off to war, right? But you know what? Most of the time, children are still born. Not stillborn,
Still being born.
still being born. Thank you. Because it doesn't take a whole lot of men to repopulate the earth. It takes women. That's why we didn't used to send women to war. Biblical principle. And there would be a lot of men that would go off to war. Is it Stalag 17, the movie, where the guy's constantly reading the letter? Honey, you're not going to believe this. Someone left a baby on our doorstep and it looks just like me. It happens. But even if they bring up children, I will bereave them till none is left. And you think about, again, go back to slavery in America. How many slave owners had slaves that if they allowed them to marry and have children, they'd sell off the children,
In some cases,
separate the families.
some cases they would encourage them so they could increase their amount of slaves too.
So they could sell them because there was profit. It's coming over the southern border today. It's more profitable to bring human beings over in slavery than drugs. Why? Because the drugs, you can only sell them one time. And once they're used, they're gone. Human beings, you can sell them over and over and over and over again. Harsh realities of the times we live in. What's changed? What has changed over the centuries? Solomon says there's nothing new under the sun. Same old evils are there. And we've got leaders that turn a blind eye to it. Maybe even profiting over it.
I was going to say, so much of it we are isolated from here. I read an article just this week that claimed there are probably more people enslaved right now around the world than ever in history. Talking as many as 40 million people are enslaved today. And in a lot of other countries, it's open. And just like it was before the Civil War here, it's common. But 40 million people in this day and time, they projected are in some form of enslavement.
Mm-hmm. I don't doubt
And a lot of it's probably sex trafficking and that sort of thing. 40 million people? Wow. I was shocked.
it. Yeah. I think that's probably a low number. If there's 1 billion people in China, I think that'd even be a low number for China itself. It's sad.
But
yeah,
mainstream America doesn't know about it, and they probably don't believe it.
We're isolated because, to a large degree, we're the middle class. All right? We're the middle class, and as the middle class, we're prosperous. We have homes, had jobs. Some of us still do. Some of us has to work for it. But, you know, they can't enslave us unless they destroy the middle class. Because there's no, in the Marxist system, the lower class has to rise up against the upper class. But here you got the buffer of the middle class that says, we're doing fine. You, lower class, can become like us. If you will just get an education, apply yourself a little bit, get off the drugs.
Welfare.
Because there's plenty of jobs. We know that. Because they still want, some of our leaders still want to increase the number of, is it H1N1? I get that confused with the virus, but the number of people to come in to work. We need more people to come into work. What about all these people coming in over the border? Well, they're not skilled labor. We need skilled labor to come in. Stop them, and we can have some more skilled labor. But get back to creating some more skilled labor here. We don't want to do that. That would ruin the welfare system, and we'd put a lot of government workers out of work. That would ruin the labor unions, and that would ruin the political donations for a particular party. So, you know. Verse 13, Ephraim, as I have seen, was like a young palm planted in a meadow. Is that where palm trees are planted, in meadows? Where are they planted?
City, around the city. Around the rivers.
In deserts and sandy areas like beaches, right? Yeah, where there's water in deserts, you know. So, yeah. But Ephraim must lead his children out to slaughter. There was only one way for the northern kingdom to get out from under the thumb of Assyria. What was that? Now, I know there are two ways, but if the Lord says, I'm not going to help you, what was the only way they could get out from under the thumb of Assyria?
Assyria would have to be conquered by somebody else.
Well, we're not to that point, but here's Assyria, here's Ephraim. The only way for Ephraim to get out from under the thumb of Assyria would be for what?
Pay a tribute to them, or
They can't, they're broke.
Become slaves.
become
Become
slaves.
slaves.
Well, that's not an option.
To rebel.
To rebel. To fight a war. And if they fight a war, what's going to happen?
They're probably going to be defeated.
They're going to lead their children out to
Die. Be murdered.
slaughter. You got no option. You fail to return to the Lord, your nation's going to be destroyed. You can't pay Assyria anymore. Your wealth is all gone. Who's going to stand up? You were their allies. You were fighting against Judah to fight against Syria. Who's going to help you? Your only hope is to fight against it. And they did. They rebelled against them. And what happened? Go back and read about the fall of Samaria in the book of 2 Kings. It's awful. It's awful.
That's where they wound up in abject poverty, wasn't it? No food, no nothing.
Yeah. And again, that the word comes to me and then it leaves. Surrounding, help me with the word. When Samaria was siege. And the siege of Samaria, and then later the siege of Jerusalem. No food. People buying, selling, others buying pigeon dung to have something to eat. Women having babies. First they eat the placenta, the afterbirth, then they eat the children because they're hungry. Verse 14, give them, O Lord, look how that's phrased in there. Give them, O Lord, what will you give? Give them a miscarrying womb and dry breasts. When the Lord departs, woe. So what if a woman does get pregnant? Lots of times in a situation like that. No food, no nourishment, what happens to the baby? Dies in the womb. And even if the baby does survive, she can't feed it. 15 through 17. Every evil of theirs is in Gilgal. There I began to hate them because of the wickedness of their deeds. I will drive them out of my house. I will love them no more. All their princes are rebels. That's verse 15. Every evil of theirs is in Gilgal. Now, where was Gilgal? Well, Gilgal was a place that was close to Bethel, which became Beth-aven. Bethel was the house of the Lord. I will drive them out of my house, or the house of God. I'll drive them out of my house. Became Beth-aven, the house of trouble, because that's where Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, set up the golden calf. Gilgal used to be the place where the prophets would gather and kind of live. But when the prophets of the Lord kind of dwindled and then some of them left and what have you, the false prophets took over. The false lying prophets. Every evil of theirs is in Gilgal because these false prophets are telling them, it's all right. Everything's going to be fine. You're the Lord's people. The Lord's going to take care of you no matter what you do, no matter how you act. Yeah, it's going to be fine. Just call on the name of the Lord. Needs to be a lesson on that coming down the road. Working on that one, what that really means. Verse 16, Ephraim is stricken, their root is dried up. They shall bear no fruit. Even though they give birth, I will put their beloved children to death. Their root is dried up. We got those crazy 4 o'clocks in our backyard. They die off, and you can cut them out, you can do everything. As long as that root's there, you know what's coming up next year. And they just take over everything in those flower beds. You know, they take over everything if you're not. Well, what happens if the root is dried up?
That's death.
Yeah, it's no fruit. No fruit. Nothing's coming out of it. Ephraim is stricken. Their root is dried up. I'm going to leave a little bit for prosperities. Is that right? Prosperity's sake. No, they're going into exile. They come back. They'll come back as Judah, but not Ephraim, not Samaria, not Israel, a nation. Verse 17, my God will reject them because they have not listened to him. They shall be wanderers among the nations, sojourners, strangers, pilgrims and exiles. Well, who? Well, that's that remnant, right? Those that are allowed to survive, they become slaves again, like in Egypt. You have any questions? I got through the whole chapter like that. There are lots of notes there that we could look at some things, but
I think we have to keep in mind, and I thought of it because I lost track of it. This isn't something that happened. This is something that's going to happen. This is prophecy telling the people, wake up today, for tomorrow, this is how it will be. Instead of the actual horror of it going on, it's the horror of what's going to happen.
right,
And they
20,
didn't
25
listen.
years later.
Right. But you gotta remember, all of these minor prophets, they were just that, they were prophets. And there's nothing positive much in any of it for the people in the near future. It's
But the
negative
individual-
situations unless they repent. Which they didn't. We know that. So, just a thought I had.
Yeah, but the individual who hears that message, the northern kingdom's going to be destroyed. What if they run down to Judah? What if they leave? They say, I'm turning back to the Lord. I'm going to worship the Lord. Go back to Judah, reestablish themselves in Judah, at the temple, right? Really make an effort to relearn the covenant. It's going to be another 100 and some years. You've got, what, 3 generations before Judah goes into exile? Maybe 4? And there's still some good people there. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, right? They get carried away. You've got good prophets down there. Not everybody down there is evil. So what happens if those people leave? Can they be reunited to the Lord? Can they come back under covenant relationship or restore that covenant relationship? Yes, they can. And maybe even if they stay there in some way, or in exile, be really hard. You're not going to count them out. The Lord's going to be the judge of that. But there's something the individual can do. And maybe it's even just stand up and say, hey, let's listen to Hosea. Let's listen to Amos. Let's listen to Micah. Let's listen to these prophets before it's too late for us as individuals. Does that make sense on it? Yeah, 20, 25 years, the nation's gone. Where, if 20, 25 years from now, I know that's a long time for people as old as we are, okay? If the United States of America's gone, where are we going to be as individuals?
Another horror story.
Now your children, grandchildren, where are they going to be? Think about that.